Also some people here who were absolutely vital and crucial during Kevin's illness in terms of keeping people in touch with him and connected, including Naomi, who's here. Took a lot of people over that last couple of years to sort of keep Kevin connected and drop in on him. And then, of course, there's dozens and dozens of other people here with their own connections to Kevin. So I guess I'm thanking everyone for being here. But Leonore and Shlomo, Mary Frances, and Scott and Sean for putting together a memorial worthy of its subject, if that's possible. And for those of us who knew Kevin well, the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks has been quite confusing on some level. It's very confusing to not be able to just call him up to talk or make a plan to go visit him, especially if you were one of the people who was basically your week around making sure you were able to go see him at least once. We're clicking on his Facebook page for a new update. We're clicking on someone else's Facebook page to see one of his comments. It's confusing that we haven't been doing this for the last 4 or 5 weeks. Kevin's very much missed, and it's my hope that by talking about him today, we're going to feel like he's with us again. This beautiful slideshow that Scott made out of all these photos is definitely helping with that. These stories which we're going to tell about Kevin with a huge amount of love will remind us that we're sad because he made us very happy. To quote the script and title of a film that Kevin and I watched together and discussed many times over the years, the idea that sorrow is just old joy, which is something that I think is going to come through today for sure. I also hope that one of the voices that will speak loudest today is Kevin's own, which is why I want to begin and base a lot of what I'm saying on Kevin's own work, specifically a passage from his book, Artificial Paradise, which is a study of the Beatles that I have returned to and reread since his passing, which has partly been for comfort, because it's nice to have Kevin around in the form of this book, and also because I think it's a really wonderful piece of criticism. And its complexity and intelligence represent a lot of what I've always loved and respected about Kevin since we became friends a little over 15 years ago. It would be an understatement, I think, and some of you will definitely know this, to say that Kevin was a fan of the Beatles. If Kevin was here, he might say, so what, so's everybody. I mean, it's not as cool as writing a book about Captain Beefheart or Frank Zappa. Not everybody's going to do that, but the Beatles, we all like the Beatles. In Artificial Paradise, what Kevin was doing was balancing his love of the Beatles, a very conventional, ordinary, North American kid growing up in Toronto, love of the Beatles, against the critical instincts that he applied to everything. Because Kevin was very much a critic, and he always wanted to relate to things critically and intellectually. And he wanted to know why the Beatles meant not so much, just so much to him, but to so many other people. He writes, quote, "The Beatles had built a world for us to dream in, and the question was, what are the contours of that dream world?" And for Kevin, no song was more symbolic of what he thought was the Beatles' utopian project, the idea of a dream world for everybody. The song that he thought was most representative of that was There's a Place, which we just heard. The second to last track on Please Please Me, in which, as Kevin writes, quote, "John Lennon tells us that true freedom begins when one finds it in the mind." That's Kevin's quote about John Lennon. I've always associated, or at least for the last few years, associated There's a Place with Kevin. Not only because he was a free thinker, and by the way, if you didn't know Kevin was a free thinker, he would tell you. But because of how deeply he absorbed that song's meaning, I think. As a critic, and I'm sure I'm going to see some of you nod when I say this, if you ever talk to Kevin about anything cultural. As a critic, Kevin's favorite way to praise a movie was to say, help the viewer get inside a particular emotion or a particular idea. And he was averse to works that he thought remained on the outside looking in. I must have heard him say something gets inside something 1,000 times in the last 15 years. And I remember making him laugh when I told him on the phone I thought he was going to like the film Inside Llewyn Davis based solely on its title. And he ended up loving the movie, actually. And he was listening to one of the songs from the soundtrack the last time I went to see him at Bridgepoint. That's true. There's a Place is a very gorgeous and melodic song, but it's also a kind of manifesto, not like the manifestos John Lennon gave later, but a sort of early, very utopian one. It's about what it is to be inside an idea. It seems to suggest, I think, that no matter what is going on in the outside world, the inner world can offer release and relief. After Kevin was first diagnosed a few years ago, I went to visit him at his apartment on Bleecker Street, a place that I'm sure many of you have been and are familiar with. And we actually ended up talking on that first conversation about his diagnosis about There's a Place. Remember Kevin sitting on the couch, he was framed by the poster he had of the Beatles behind him. I don't know if some of you remember that poster, but he had it up there for a long time. He told me that he'd always loved that song, but that it had taken on a deeper meaning for him in that moment, when he was staring down a potentially long convalescence. Next to the pain and uncertainty of doctors' visits and treatments, the idea of being able to take solace in memories and passions had a new urgency for him. Instead of simply retreating inward during his illness, I think Kevin turned himself inside out in the most elegant way. His mind was a very beautiful place. It was a cluttered place, but it was also spacious. And there was a lot to look at, and there was a lot to listen to, and he was always adding to it or pulling something out of the corner, something out of the closet. He made that place somewhere that the rest of us could go for conversation and companionship. He invited us in, and he was always a gracious host. And as a result, I think, and other people I've spoken to have said a version of this, the solace that he cultivated for himself became a shared commodity. And I don't know what could be more utopian than that. Kevin's apartment was a small place, and his hospital room was a smaller place still. But with him at the center, these places became paradises and not artificial ones. The joy and friendship that they housed was very real. I made a point of seeing Kevin at least once a week, sometimes more, ever since his diagnosis, always with the intention of making him feel better, but inevitably, it was me who came away from these visits feeling energized or relieved. Energized by the exchange of ideas, which remained sharp to the very end, and relieved because at no point during these talks did he ever seem to be anybody but himself. And I'm sure that those of you who saw him felt the same way. He was always himself. And it goes without saying that while he was always himself, that self meant different things to different people. As a son, as a brother, as an uncle, as a colleague, as a roommate, as a partner, as a teacher, as an online pen pal, as a writer, as a byline, as a friend of a friend. Or as my friend sometimes said, that guy who's often at your parties. He said it nicely. Yet I also expect that whatever category you fell in on that list or outside of it, you would recognize the same things about him, because Kevin's goodness was a common denominator. His friendliness, which was not cloying or ingratiating, but genuine, tied to a curiosity about people that was not naive and not judgmental. His passion for different forms of art, which was rooted in pleasure, how something made him feel, but also intellectual engagement, which is how and why it made him think. Kevin believed that criticism was not about decoding or completing or solving a word, it was about having an encounter with it. And as a result, Kevin's criticism was quite unavoidably personal, which is why he never backed down on his judgments, but he allowed space for others. Our long, often contentious talks about movies and directors, some of whom I loved and he loathed, and vice versa, never once led to an actual fight. Not once. Not really. While Kevin could be very stubborn, and that might be a word that some of you associate with him as well, he never ever tried to tell you how to think. Because he was free in his own mind, he believed others had a right to that same intellectual liberty. Now, there's more that I could say, but a lot of what I know about him as a person, about his past and his history, his friendships and his hardships as well, can be better expressed by people who were there for it in real time. We have a lot of those people today, and they're going to speak. But I will say one more thing, and I think I'll be able to get through it. After learning of Kevin's passing on a Saturday morning that I was spending with my daughter Leah, I thought immediately of a concert that he and I attended several years ago at the Phoenix, across the street from his apartment, and yet he only went there once in like 8 years, so take it from that one, by the band Ockerville River. This show was a few months before Kevin was diagnosed, and it's also about a year before I found out that I was going to be a father. So in both contexts, it feels like a really long time ago, even though it's not. During the show, the group played a wonderful song called Down the Deep River, which Kevin immediately claimed as a favorite. He loved it from the moment he heard the record, much less in concert. When Leah was born, in fact the morning after she was born, because he was checking in on me, he told me that I might want to listen to it because of some lyrics in it about fatherhood. I put it on my iPod this morning, and that morning, and this morning actually, and I can't hear it now without thinking of him any more than I can listen to There's a Place. It strikes me that both of these songs in a way are about a longing for escape, and while the title of Down the Deep River refers to a physical location, it's also very much about a state of mind. The chorus goes, down a hall in your house, down a road in December, we can never go back, we can only remember. When Kevin and I talked about the song, and we actually did talk about the song a few months ago, when I brought Leah to visit him at Bridgepoint, and he reminded me about that call at the hospital. He told me it was the way that the song understood that memory was a bittersweet thing that made him treasure it. I don't know if I've ever understood that feeling more than I do now, knowing that I can't go back and that I can only remember Kevin, but also with great gratitude that I can climb inside that memory anytime I want. So I will defer, as Kevin would probably want me to John Lennon. There's a place that I can go when I feel low, when I feel blue, and it's my mind and there's no time when I'm alone. I would like now to ask Walt Knox, childhood friend of Kevin's, a longtime friend of Kevin's, to come and speak. Everyone who's speaking today is speaking because they want to, because we thought it was important. And I should just say, Kevin really wanted Walter to come speak today. Not when he knew that anything was about to happen. He mentioned it in passing like 5 times, that this was something that he would want. So we're really grateful for Walter to coming today, and thank you.